You're listening to episode 320, The Weeds and Seeds of Ministry. This is number 3, Micromanaging Millet and Trusting Thyme.
Welcome to Transforming Missions podcast, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
We'll say more about the weed and seed for this week in just a minute, but we want to remind you again what these weeds and seeds are and why we're spending time talking about weeds and seeds on a podcast for Christian leaders.
Well, maybe you can look at it this way. Ministry weeds are things that we all struggle with as pastors and leaders. The weeds are things like overwhelm, fear, not having enough time, isolation, things that stop us from being and becoming who God created us to be. The weeds tend to choke our effectiveness. So as leaders, being aware of weeds is important because they can quickly take over. They pop up all the time, but as we learn to identify them, we can quickly pluck them and replace them with seeds.
So then here's your reminder about what the seeds are. The seeds are the solution, the response, the antithesis of the weed. Sometimes there's not an exact correlation, but the seeds help us to continue to lead well and fuel effective ministry. When we embody practices like equipping others for the work of ministry and building trust, one of the things that we'll be talking about today, we continue to grow as leaders and serve in ways that honor our calling, honor God, and honor the people that we're leading.
Okay, Sarah, I like asking this question. Are you ready for this week's weed?
I think so, although no one ever wants to be on the receiving end of this weed. Why don't you tell us what it is, Tim?
The weed for this week is micromanaging millet.
And now you know why I said no one wants to be on the receiving end of this one.
Yeah, micromanagers aren't fun to be around. They hover and need to be in control of everything. And as a result, the people on their team or the people they're leading don't feel or experience empowered.
Yeah, and another way I'd say it is micromanaging is often stems from the leader's own insecurity. You might even say it's a form of arrogance because they think that they need to know everything and be at the center of everything, and therefore they're micromanaging.
Yeah, I usually say they're in over their heads. That's why they micromanage. And that results in needing to have all the details and to have a say about every aspect of every decision in the church. So to equip the saints for the work of ministry is not something that they do or believe. They try to do it all and not effectively. I mean, it's like, okay, the leader kind of says to themselves, I'll just have to do this myself.
You nailed it, Tim. And as we continue to go back and forth about micromanaging millet, one of the things that's coming to mind, even as you just said that example, is lack of self-awareness that is present in this weed. These aren't bad people. They're often very caring and very committed people. They just don't have the self-awareness of what they are doing when they're micromanaging and saying, well, I guess I'll just have to do it.
Yeah, they're exhausted because they're in the weeds.
So why don't you say a little bit more about that?
Well, Sarah, you've heard me say more than once that if you're in over your head, you want to micromanage because then you feel like you have some control over what you don't know.
Or you think you have control
over things you don't know. And the people around you are the ones who suffer. Now, I give you a couple examples. One of them, I'd been appointed to another church, and so I was trying to be very gracious to the person coming in behind me. And so we had a staff meeting. I invited that pastor to come into the staff meeting, and everybody introduced themselves. Then it came time for that pastor to introduce himself. And the very first thing he said, he telegraphed his leadership, because the very first thing he said is, I'm not a micromanager.
Ding, 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 ding. You hear someone say that, and and guess what
Now,
they are.
the reality is he had not been in a church that size. And so he was feeling a little intimidated when he got started, but he couldn't admit his intimidation. So he had to be strong arm at the very beginning. I'm not a micromanager, but what happened after that was that he had to give approval to everything that was going on before it could ever happen. I know of other micromanagers, and I've met people who say at the very beginning, I want you to be able to do what you do best and then tell you what you're going to do.
Yes, or how you're going to do it. You have the skill to do this. I know that you'll do it in the best way possible, but here's how I think you should do it.
That's another one. And then another one, which I want to be careful about, but that's it. That's sometimes when letters go out from different groups of people in the church, they go out to the folks that they are responsible for, and the leader has to write the letter so everybody else can sign it. There's just something about all of that that just doesn't, well, it's called micromanaging, and it's not good leadership.
Well, and the thing that, and we'll get to this in just a minute, the thing that is present that is not present in all of the examples that we have offered is trust. Exactly. That is what is missing in the midst of all of that. I mean, I think we have all experienced people that, and I probably have experienced it more and probably done it more when stress is high. It's okay, got to make sure all the details. Sometimes it will happen in small doses and you kind of go, what was that all about? And you scratch your head and you move on because it's not the norm. But when it becomes the norm, and it is the norm, there's not trust that is present. So thank you for those illustrations. You have one more example.
I was just in a position once where I was given responsibility for a larger group of people and in making the decisions of where they were going to meet and how long it was going to be and who was going to be involved in it. And we made those decisions, but then it didn't work right with one of the people in the group. They went over my head to my supervisor who shifted everything, who changed everything.
Yeah, that's a whole other level of micromanaging.
Right. But so I just wanted our listeners to know that there are different aspects of micromanaging, and without healthy self-awareness, you'll get in the weeds quickly with micromanaging.
And we've offered several different examples, and don't think that you have to have all of them to fall into the category of micromanaging millet. If it's happening, there's a different response that you might want to consider. We're simply trying to share some of the characteristics of what micromanaging can look like, and there are likely others. Here's one last characteristic of micromanaging millet that I think can appear. Tim, you've already pointed to this one in one of your examples. Someone who micromanages as their default leadership style can often be guarded in what they say and do because they need to perform. And so they're waiting. They might isolate someone one-on-one so that they can micromanage, one-on-one, and nobody else is seeing that, and you can't read what they're doing because they're trying to perform. Impatience and experience are what feed this weed. I'll just leave it at that. So if you find yourself being impatient, or if you don't have the experience and you're given a new opportunity, what we would encourage you to do is to have the patience to learn and grow and bring people alongside you that will help you do that. But if that doesn't happen, if you don't have the patience to help people learn and grow, you're likely going to be in the weeds. So a couple of questions that you might ask yourself for this weed is something along the lines of, am I doing this because I need to be in control? Or am I doing it because it's helpful and needed? Both can lead to micromanaging, but being aware of why you are doing it and then adapting appropriately might be the best way to lead through this one.
So what I'm hearing you say, I'll just ask it this way: is it fair then to say that when micromanaging millet recognizes that they're over their heads or in the weeds, that they can call on trusting time?
Well, that's a smooth transition to the seed for this week. Yes, I think that is fair to say. So what is trusting time all about?
Trusting time focuses leadership on building trust with others and leading with courage. They model with authenticity and vulnerability with their teams and seek to nurture trusting relationships with the congregation or the people they lead. Let me see if I can give an example at this point. I was involved recently in a conversation to be part of a congregation that I don't know anybody that's a part of that congregation, and nobody knows me. But yet it's a time to have some introduction to the congregation. And so a person with whom I'm having conversation, and it's all good, all the information's good, it's all needed. I'm learning something. By the way, one of my top 5 strengths is learner. So I can learn something in every situation. And so I'm listening closely to learn. And then I hear, well, you'll need to contact the people of that church and tell them what time you're going to meet with them. And all I could say back was, why am I doing it? They don't even know who I am. I don't have any relationship with them. Why would they feel like that they wanted to do anything with me? I want to build trust with the people. I don't want to come in and say to a group of people, this is when we're going to meet. And then the rest of the time I'm working with them, they're saying to me, what else are you going to tell us to do? So that was a kind of a struggle for me in terms of, if we're going to build trust, you've got to have a relationship. And to build the relationship, it sounds like a catch-22. It sounds like you got to have one before you have the other. But if you don't build relationship, you're never going to have the trust. And if people don't trust you, you're never going to build the relationship.
Right. That's a great example of trusting time. And there's an element of trusting. So you were focusing on the trust. The other part of that is there's also an element of patience and not having an immediate response or an immediate answer all the time, and trusting that over time those relationships will develop, the ministries will develop, that what needs to happen will get sorted out. But some of us can be a bit impatient. And there was a time in our ministry together that I remember, Tim, you saying to me, Sara, you're really patient. And I was so far from being patient, it wasn't even funny. Looking back now, what I would say, and you might have thought that I was patient, but I know that I wasn't. What I can say now is you were trying to speak that into my life and leadership. Instead of saying to me, oh, just be patient, it was, you're being very patient. You might need to be patient a little bit longer. and just in the way that you would say it, it wasn't as simple as, now just be patient, we'll get there. There was an active patience and pacing and a reminder to pace the leadership so that you can stay hopeful about the future that you're trying to build and lead people at the pace that they're able to be led. I can say that now, and I am much more aware of that now. But looking back, I wasn't so patient.
Oh, I'm not going to confirm or deny what you just said.
Tim's copping out of that one.
But I will say this in terms of developing trust and relationship, to be the kind of leader that's needed, you create a space and invite people into it. And even though you didn't think you were patient, we created a space and I invited you into patience. That's just what you said. That's
right.
And part of that comes because, if you become the leader that you're supposed to be, you learn how to do those things without saying, now what do I do?
Right.
Because you develop trust. I guess I could say if I didn't trust you, I probably wouldn't have said anything.
Right. You probably would have just gone around me. And
exactly.
You would have gone around
me. Micromanaging Millet.
Or you would have told me this is what you need to do. And I can't ever see you saying or doing anything like this. And I've certainly never experienced it. But here are the things that you need to do. Stay in your lane. That could have been another response. So are there things that leaders who are trusting time might offer?
Sure. Trusting time's willing to admit what they don't know. And this is a huge characteristic, a very good characteristic for leadership. They recognize the phrases, I don't know, and I need your help, and are always inviting others into ministry to acknowledge limitations and to stay rooted in reality.
Yeah, those two phrases, I don't know and I need your help. There are some that have viewed those two phrases or something like them as weaknesses or even incompetence. But if this podcast helps you replace that thought with the thought of, no, this is about how you develop trust, we'll call it success for the day. The greatest way that you can empower your team is to say to someone, I need your help. So Tim, I need your help with an example here. What did I just do?
We're illustrating our conversation, Sara. You invited me into the conversation. You said to me, she thinks I have something to offer to this. She's looking to me for help. Maybe even she thinks I have experience here that will guide the conversation. You've created a space and invited me into it.
So, Tim, I need your help with an example here. I'm really asking this time.
Sara, let me go this way with what we're doing. A leader who thinks they need to have all the answers can be dangerous. So let me ask those of you who are listening to reflect for a minute on your leadership. There's likely someone you've encountered who has an answer for everything, or maybe an excuse for everything. That's part of what we're talking about. That's the weed. The seed of trusting time. An example of that might be you model authenticity and vulnerability with the people with whom you're leading. You seek to nurture trusting relationships with the congregation. So let me say as an illustration at this point, or just as a statement, it's more important to build the trust than it is to get the results you want. You'll get the results you want through trust, but to try to force it, one of the things we always hear around Easter is caterpillar becoming a butterfly. And I remember an illustration I've used over and over about when the caterpillar has the chrysalis, the cocoon, it's starting to break out, and the butterfly is struggling to get out of that cocoon or out of that chrysalis. You can't help it come out of that cocoon because it's the struggle of coming out that allows it to have the strength in the wings to fly. And that's a really good image, if from my perspective, about leadership. You create a space or provide a space for people to step into, and even if it's a bit of a struggle, it's not up to you to take away the struggle. It's up to you to stand with them and continue to say over and over, I'm here with you. We can get this. You are patient. You're the kind of person we need for this moment, and just be with. And then the next time, it's not the struggle. It's the trust that takes it the next step.
Yeah, and I know that we have had a conversation about braving trust on the podcast, and I'll link that in the show notes below. But some of the things that you might want to think about, and if you've read Brené Brown's Dare to Lead book or have that book on your bookshelf, you might want to grab it off the bookshelf and go to the chapter around braving trust, because she's identified through her research there are 7 things that are needed, and I'm just going to run through them real quickly and then we'll wrap this up. Boundaries, reliability, accountability, a vault, and that means, people understand what can be shared, what can't be shared, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. And as we've been talking, I wanted to list those out because I think all of the examples that we have offered in terms of trusting time illustrate those 7 different attributes of trust and what is really needed. And those things don't happen overnight. It's not as easy as saying, okay, here are the boundaries. No, you work out what the boundaries are in conversation throughout time with people. It's usually not, there are some clear boundaries. Yes, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the leadership, the gray area of leadership when you're trying to make decisions. So I just wanted to offer those characteristics as a way to think about and remind you about what is needed to build trust.
So may I add one thing that comes to mind when you use braving trust? And the last one, which you and I have had lots of conversation about, is generosity. One of the things that helps build trust more than anything else is not jumping to conclusions when somebody does something or says something without thinking that through. You can develop trust much, much greater and deeper by taking somebody for who they are and finding out why they respond the way they do.
Yeah.
That's what that's meant by generosity. It's not taking money out of your pocket and giving it to somebody.
Right. It's the answering the question of what's the most generous interpretation that I can make of what is happening here. And yeah, it's such a powerful way to flip the script. I think that question for me really stops me and invites me to ask a question instead of making assumptions.
So, yeah, thank you. I've learned that from you as it's come from Brené Brown. And I think I would say at this moment that generosity may be part of the soil that trusting time has its roots.
That's a good way to say it. Is there anything else that we need to explore about micromanaging millet and trusting time?
No, I think we've weeded the garden and we've planted the seed, so we're ready.
Oh, I'm looking forward to the harvest.
Trust would be a great harvest. Sarah.
How many different ways can we keep this metaphor going? Oh, goodness. Well, thank you for joining us for this 3rd installment of the Weeds and Seeds of Ministry. May you stay out of micromanaging millet and in trusting time. What weed and seed do you think we'll share next week? Time will tell. You see what I did there? Okay, you can go ahead and groan now. As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode, including that link back to Braving Trust that we talked about earlier on the episode at transformingmission.org/320. If you missed last week or the introduction to this whole series, we'll link to that in the on the show notes page as well. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.